Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order, Welcome to Her Panwo TV on VidMe. Although I might actually put this up on YouTube as well. It depends if it fits in with the my sort of YouTube type movies as opposed to my VidMe type movies, which are a little bit different. Well, this is a film review. Now, I've done a couple of those on YouTube, the roving ones where I actually go to the cinema. This is a film I can't review in that way because it's a film that's quite old actually. It's a 1991 film by Arte de Jong, who's a Dutch director, and it's called Drop Dead Fred. And this is it. I've got the DVD of it there, see, and that's the back. Now this is a film with Rik Mayall, and it's actually the late great, hilariously funny Rik Mayall. It's one of his less well-known films, and one that I think perhaps deserves to be more famous because he's one of my favourites of his. Now the idea to do this particular review is I once again have to thank Tanya Mills on VidMe, and if you go to the link in the description box, I'll show you a link. There's a link there to her video, which is a film review of this. Now she gave it 1 thumbs up, which I think isn't. She said it wasn't terribly good. The second half was better than the first, and things like that. But I like it an awful lot more. And what's more, I see something in the film that perhaps the makers of the film did not intend. It has a theme which is perhaps unintentional and much more serious than you'd think. I mean, this film is a black comedy. It's funny. Rik Mayall is a comedian. He's a great comedian, one of the world's greatest and most famous. But there's a serious element to this film. Definitely a very serious element to it. His co-star is Phoebe Cates, who's a well-known actress, who's best known for The Gremlins. However, again, this is a film that she's not so well known for, but I think she's very, very good in it indeed. She was the absolutely brilliant casting. She's the perfect person to play that role, the role of the woman, the main character in it, the leading woman. Now, I think the reason she's so good is when you get into the actual film. She has this. She's obviously a grown woman. She plays a grown woman who's a professional. She's a court stenographer. But she actually loses her job at the beginning. But she starts off as a courtroom stenographer. So she's a professional, mature woman, probably in her mid-30s, I'd say. But she has a kind of childlike. There's a kind of like she's not lost a kind of childlike element to her personality and to her looks. She's somewhat youthful. She has this youthful appearance to her and youthful attitude to her, which I think makes her so good to play that part, to play that character. Now, and she's married as well. She's married to a man called Charles, who is a bit of a pig and cheats on her and mistreats her, lies to her, things like that. And so, what happens is I should point out that this looks like a children's film. I mean, by looking at the cover and reading the blurb at the back, you might well think this is a film for children. It is not. It has a 12 certificate. It is not for children. It has some very adult themes. It has some bad language, black comedy, as I said, some sexual references, and some quite disturbing elements to it. I mean, even though it is funny, it has some very disturbing elements to it. And I'm thinking particularly of the emotional abuse of children, because the main character is Elizabeth, her name is, and part of the film is from when she's young, when she's about 5 years old, and she is psychologically abused by her mother, and it's extremely upsetting to watch that. I really do. It's very well done. It's kind of tragic comedy in a way, because it never loses its funniness, it never loses its humour, but it's just so awful. Yeah, she's from a broken home. Her father walks out and she never sees him, and it's like, well, basically, what it is, there is going to be spoilers to this. There is going to be spoilers to this particular movie, to this particular video, this review. Okay, but Rik Mayall plays her imaginary friend. Now, the imaginary friend phenomenon is something is very real. I mean, I can look up the whole thing about it is it's So a lot of children have this. It's a lot of children have this imaginary friend thing. I haven't opened the page. Sorry. There's even a YouTube page for it. Sorry, not YouTube. There's a Wikipedia page for the imaginary friend. Imaginary friends, pretend friend, invisible friend, a psychological and social phenomenon where a friendship or other interpersonal relationship takes place in the imagination rather than in physical reality. And it goes into certain areas, including things like the tulpa and the bicameral mind, bicameralism, things like that, schizophrenia, stuff like this. These are big subjects. I can't go into it now. There's a cartoon series called Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Now, this is what a lot of children develop. They end up playing with imaginary friends, and Rik Mayall is the imaginary friend of this young girl. Now, when Elizabeth is about 5 years old, she is in a home where her mother and father split up. Her father leaves. She's very close to her father, and he's kind to her. And for some reason, though, it appears he breaks contact with her, which is very, very strange, because he's very clearly very fond of his daughter and treats her very well, as opposed to her mother, who is an old bag who psychologically abuses her. Now, and Rik Mayall appears in her life as her imaginary friend, and he's really funny. He's mischievous. He wears this green suit, as you can see here. He wears this green suit, and he plays all kinds of like childish games with her, and he becomes a constant companion to her. And in his own way, he provides comfort for her during this period of her life when she's being abused. Now, then, what happens is, and you learn this through the course of the movie, her mother finds out about it, and her father's very open to the idea and asks her questions about it, but her mother finds out. Sorry, it's quite. It makes me. You see what I mean by it being serious. Now having this theme to it makes me feel emotional. Sorry guys. Yeah, she actually, what happens is Drop Dead Fred jumps into this old broken Jack in the Box, which he broke as a joke, and suddenly her mother finds out that he's in there, so she tapes it up, and then she takes it away from her, and she threatens to throw it in the rubbish, and then it'll be crushed in the dust cart when the bin men come along. And the girl says, "No, don't take him away from me." And her mother begs her. Elizabeth begs her mother not to do. Little 5-year-old Emma, 5-year-old Elizabeth begs her mother not to do this. And then flash forward to the present day. Elizabeth is now an adult, as I said, and she loses her job. Her husband's treating her like dirt. She goes back to live with her mother, and a Drop Dead Fred reappears in her life. She finds the old Jack in the Box and she opens it, and he reappears in her life, and all hell breaks loose, which is really, really, really funny. Loads of comedy, loads of hilarious comedy ensues, and like I said, this is Rik Mayall, who sadly died a couple of years ago, is such a good comedic actor. He's really, really good. He's so brilliant. And oh yeah. Yeah, her car gets stolen as well. That's right. She loses her job, her car, and her husband all in the same day. Yeah. At the same time, she gets romantically involved with this kind of like this mild-mannered, nice guy called Mickey, who has a daughter as well, but they end up together at the end. But yeah. Now what happens is her mother still treats her like she's a little girl. Even though she's an adult, still treats her like she's a little girl. And a lot of the humour is that Elizabeth now has to keep secret the fact that her imaginary friend from her childhood has returned. And then her mother takes her to this psychiatrist, eventually finds out, and takes her to this psychiatrist. And it's all full of... This is the bit that Tanya liked. The waiting room, but to me it's just it's heartbreaking, because the waiting room is filled with these children, and these imaginary friends are all there, and they're being taken in to be cured, to have these relationships broken and have these imaginary friends stripped from them. There's an element of this in my new book, actually. I put into my new book. Oh, and so the psychiatrist gives Elizabeth these green pills that she has to take, and Charles and her mother, her awful husband and her awful mother, conspire to manipulate her. They have the help of this really horrible, big, brutish nurse, who's one of these big sort of like 6 foot tall, 2-ton Tessie types. I knew a few of them at my hospital, I'll tell you. And this nurse is basically really, really brutal. But she has to take these pills, and she takes these pills, and Fred is like, I've got to stop. Sorry. As I said, this does affect me very deeply, because of the nature of the film, and the nature it has this theme to it, as I said, which I find very poignant. Perhaps many other people haven't seen it. Maybe some people, maybe it wasn't intended even by the producers to be in there. But the psychologist, as I said, gives Elizabeth these green pills to rid her of the imaginary friends. And you see all these other little kids in the waiting room with all their imaginary friends are there playing around, and they're about to have those taken away from them as well. Now, and she's taking these. So she starts taking these pills, and Fred is there. And Fred is getting really sick, and his clothes become dim. This green suit he wears becomes kind of, because he wears sometimes different costumes through the movie. The green suit becomes kind of like thin and ragged, and it gets tears in it and less colourful. And he begs her to stop taking the pills. And I don't want to make it a complete spoiler by saying exactly what happens next, but in the end, she does. She stops taking the pills. She believes him. And she stops taking the pills, but it's too late. She can't stop Fred being returned to whatever world he comes from. But before he leaves, I don't want to give it a spoiler, but he essentially sets her free. So in a sense, he doesn't need her. She doesn't need him there anymore. Now, I should point out that not only is Rik Mayall wonderful, and Elizabeth's actress Phoebe Cates is really wonderful. There's a great supporting cast as well. I mean, the guy who plays Mickey is sort of, I don't know, the guy who plays Mickey is a bit of a drip, I suppose, a bit wimpish, but he is likeable. He is likeable, and it's unusual to find a man portrayed as attractive like that. So I don't want to complain too much. At the end, she finds out that Mickey, her boyfriend's daughter, can then see Drop Dead Fred, and Drop Dead Fred's come into her life. There's also Carrie Fisher is in it, the late great Carrie Fisher, who was Carrie Fisher, who of course was in Star Wars. She's in it, and she, because Elizabeth, of course, because she doesn't have really a very good relationship with her mother, she's done what many people do. She has made friends with an older woman. Carrie Fisher is her friend Janie, who is about 20 years older than her. As I said, Elizabeth's probably about in her mid-30s. This lady's probably in her 50s. But she's very good as well. She's brilliant in that as well. Now, as I was saying, you know, there's another film that's very similar to this. This one, Harvey, with James Stewart. And it's a U certificate. This is okay for adults. It's an adult for films, but it's suitable for children. It's aimed at adults. It's actually very similar to Drop Dead Fred. It's much older. It was made in 1950, but has a very, very similar plot. And again, it's about an adult man who has an imaginary friend who's a 6 foot tall rabbit. And we've got to realise the thing about it is that the imaginary friend phenomenon may actually be some kind of paranormal phenomenon. So therefore, it's something that actually might. What's possible is that children are actually perceiving elements of reality that we adults cannot. For whatever reason, maybe it's because of conformity, sheer psychological and cultural conformity. Because of course, what does your mum and dad say when you say you've got an imaginary friend? Well, don't be silly, grow up. And of course, as children grow older, the imaginary friends tend to leave them. However, it's there may be other reasons why we lose the ability to see these entities, these otherworldly entities, which, if imaginary friends are actually that, they are actually objectively real entities from another aspect of reality. And some of it may be, I say, it's cultural conformity, but maybe it's also medication. And of course, that is a theme in Drop Dead Fred and in Harvey, because in Harvey, it's his sister who tries to get him. Actually, it's much more. Harvey is actually in some ways is far sad. It's far sadder, and it's also a comedy, but it's also far more extreme in a way than Drop Dead Fred, because it's his sister gets actually committed to a psychiatric institution, and the doctor wants to give him an injection of something called Formula 977, which is basically the same as the green pills in Drop Dead Fred. They'll strip him of his ability to see this otherworldly entity. And in Harvey, the otherworldly entity is actually a puka, which is in Celtic mythology from Ireland. A puka is a mischievous spirit. The thing about it is, you see, it could be other things. It may be something to do with the chemtrails, it may be something to do with vaccination or with fluoridation of water, which calcifies the pineal gland. Big subjects, I don't have time to go into them. I've covered this on other videos on YouTube. So, yeah, I mean, this funny thing is, like, Cradle Mutwa, in his famous interview with David Icke, which I do recommend you check out, he's a South African shaman from the Zulu nation. He said that the children of South Africa were given BCG vaccinations by the missionaries, by the doctors during the colonial period, and when they'd had these vaccinations, they were no longer able to see their ancestors, because the traditional African culture is based around ancestor worship and the ability to perceive ancestors through ritual. This vaccination prevented the children from seeing their ancestors and taking part in these practices, which we would today call mediumship or psychic powers. The people of Cradle Mutwa's culture went to when they realised what was going on, they went to enormous lengths to protect to protect our children's spiritual eyes. They burned the kids' arms with hot grains of maize grains to make fake BCG marks, so that they could pretend that the children had already been vaccinated. Also, Cradle mentions that the Zulu children were given sweets. They were given a pink sugary sweet called Bonsella, and they became addicted to it. Now, funny enough, John Pilger says something similar. He wrote a book about South Africa, and he says something similar. It's in that book, Heroes. I've put it somewhere. I can't find it. It's in there. It's definitely in there. But he says that the adults were given a pink sugary drink to drink in the homelands in South Africa. And what about, maybe this is aspartame? Maybe there's something to do with aspartame. Maybe the sugary drinks or the sweetened drinks that children are eating today are connected to having that same effect. So this is really, really interesting, and it's very, very tragic as well. It's very, very upsetting. But I'll just read you this, because there may be more to, the reason there may be more to this than meets the eye is because there are real cases a bit similar to Elizabeth in Drop Dead Fred, in that adults, when asked, you see, kids obviously grow out of having imaginary friends, and the parents say, don't be silly. Sometimes they might be medicated, as in the case of these films, Drop Dead Fred and Harvey. But some children actually, the imaginary friend departs their lives voluntarily when they reach a certain age, saying, look, you're old enough, you don't need me now. In those circumstances, very often they just forget about it. When they're asked about it as adults, they remember. Sometimes, occasionally, someone might say, "Well, did you have an imaginary friend when you were kids?" Amazingly, the adults will say, "It wasn't imaginary; it was real." I'll give you an example of this. Now, this is a book called. This is a very well-known book here, "The God Delusion" by Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins briefly touches on this subject. Now, he says here, because he talks about God. He talks about the need to write a book about God. This is in chapter 10, a much needed gap. But he says As a preliminary to consolation itself, I want to begin with the childhood phenomenon of the imaginary friend, which I believe has affinities with religious belief. And then he quotes a poem by A.A. Milne, the author of Winnie the Pooh. And now A.A. Milne, of course, is most famous for that. He never thought that Christopher Robin and Pooh Bear and Eeyore and all those people were real. However, he wrote a poem where he talked about an imaginary friend called Binker, and he wrote a poem about it. I'm not going to read the poem out. But then Dawkins goes on to say, is the imaginary friend phenomenon a higher illusion in a different category from ordinary childhood make-believe? My own experience is not much to help here. Like many parents, my mother kept a notebook of my childish sayings. In addition to simple pretendings, now I am the man in the moon, an accelerator, a Babylonian, I was evidently fond of second-order pretending. Now I'm an owl pretending to be a water wheel, which might be reflexive. Now I'm a little boy pretending to be Richard. I never once believed I really was any of those things. And I think that is normally true of childhood make-believe games. But I didn't have a Binker. That is, Richard Dawkins never had an imaginary friend. If the testimony of their adult selves is to be believed, at least some of those normal children who have imaginary friends really do believe they exist, and in some cases see them as clear and vivid hallucinations. Well, maybe they're not hallucinations. Maybe the children are they're perceiving things. Maybe children are natural psychics, which they lose when they grow up. I suspect that the Binker phenomenon of childhood may be a good model for understanding theistic belief in adults. I do not know whether psychologists have studied it from this point of view, but it will be a worthwhile piece of research. Companion and confidant. A Binker for life. That is surely one role that God plays, one gap that might be left if God were to go. Another child, a girl, had a little purple man who seemed to her a real and visible presence, and who would manifest himself sparkling out of the air with a gentle tinkling sound. He visited her regularly, especially when she felt lonely, but with decreasing frequencies she grew older. On a particular day, just before she went to kindergarten, the little purple man came to her, heralded by his usual tinkling fanfare, and announced that he would not be visiting her anymore. This saddened her, but the little purple man told her that she was getting bigger now and wouldn't need him in the future. He must leave her now so that he could look after other children. He promised her that he would come back to her if ever she really needed him. He did return to her many years later in a dream when she had a personal crisis and was trying to decide what to do with her life. A bit like with Drop Dead Fred, isn't it? A bit like, exactly like with the movie. You know. To do with her life. The door of her bedroom opened and a cartload of books appeared, pushed into the room by the little purple man. She interpreted this as advice that she should go to university, advice that she took and later judged to be good. The story makes me almost tearful, and it brings me as close as I shall probably come to understanding the consoling and counselling role imaginary gods play in people's lives. A being may exist only in the imagination, yet still seem completely real to the child, and still give real comfort and good advice. Perhaps even better, imaginary friends and imaginary gods have the time and patience to devote all their attention to the sufferer. Don't know why they call him a sufferer. And they are much cheaper than psychiatrists or professional counsellors. Did gods, in their role as counsellors and consolers, evolve from the imaginary friend phenomenon by a sort of psychological pedomorphosis? Pedomorphosis is the retention into adulthood of childhood characteristics. Right, and then he talks about Julian Jaynes. That's the origin of the consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Now that's very interesting. However, I don't have time to go into that. But that's a piece of classic Richard Dawkins's classic atheist book there. So yeah, we definitely. I mean, there was a website called Imaginary Friends. Where was it? Maybe I'll just see if I can find it. So, there's a page from Psychology Today. Oh bloody hell! There used to be a website called ImaginaryFriends.com. I remember. I don't know. It's not there anymore. But here's this Imaginary Friends. Are invisible friends a sign of social problems? By Eileen Kennedy Moore, Ph and D. Oh. A friend told me she once had a moment of sheer terror in her own driveway. Her 3 kids were sitting in the back seat. She backed out when suddenly the youngest daughter, who was 4, screamed, "Stop!" My friend slammed on the brakes with a heart in her throat and looked around, trying to spot the danger. What? What is it? You almost ran over Boopsie, her daughter explained. I haven't read all this, but I mean, the problem is that why do children invent invisible friends? See, they assume it's not real. Should you respond to how should you respond to your child's imaginary friend? Oh God. Relax and enjoy. Oh, that's good. Well, that's nice. I think at least this person says just enjoy this. So this particular psychologist, sorry to put on the strange voice at the beginning. It may not be quite the officious bitch that I thought she was. So yeah, basically, if you maybe it's a natural part of childhood that we should be maybe the problem is here not that children have imaginary friends, that we humans don't, that we adults rather, we don't. The children have them, and they lose the ability to see them through whatever process society has, conformist society, conventional society has brought in to condition its members, its units. And so the problem is not that the children see these so-called imaginary friends, but that we adults can't anymore. Maybe that's the problem. If you have small children, anyone watching this, and they report imaginary friends, then encourage them. Ask them about their friends. What do they look like? What's their name? Ask the child to introduce you to them. Their friend might not be imaginary. It's possible that you might end up being able to see it too. But don't be part of this. Don't be another gatekeeper for your child. They're going to get enough of that when they're at school. Don't drag your child into the pit of conformism, where they can become sane and normal, good citizens. A new generation of mill fodder. I think maybe it's. I know some of you will probably say I've read too much into this film. I've read more into it than I should, and perhaps that's true. Maybe I'm seeing something that's just not there. Maybe it's just how it makes me feel. Because in this film, Harvey, that is definitely a theme. The theme that there's nothing wrong with Elwood Dowd, the man played James Stewart's character who sees the 6-foot-tall rabbit. There's nothing wrong with him. And in the end, the characters become to realise that. They realise there's nothing wrong with him. We were the ones who were doing wrong by trying to stop him. And so please, just remember that if you've got kids, if you've got little kids. Now, yeah. So all in all, I have a very different. It seems that Tanya and I have very different. Tanya Mills. She could check her out. There's a link I'll put a link in the description box to her own review of Drop Dead Fred, and of course she reviewed Teeth, which I made a video about just previously. She's this Canadian lady who she does vlogs and things like that, and so check out her channel. She just gave me a shout out today, which is nice. But she and I clearly have very, very different tastes in films. That's very, very obvious. So thank you very much for watching Hapanwo TV on Vimeo. As I say, you might be watching this on YouTube. I'll see how I feel. Oh, Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, stop the New World Order.